Welcome, Dave. Very excited to have you back.
Good to see you again. It always is. We are now a week away. What other day of the year do you get 5, 6, 7, 8 players added to your roster? So very exciting time here.
Yes. And I was thinking about this earlier that we've been talking about this draft for so long because the Giants have been so bad. Like, I remember back in November being like, okay, well, if you're watching college football this weekend, these are the players to watch. Yep. And now we're finally at the end. We're just a week away and we'll finally get to see what the Giants do, which I'm very, very excited about. One thing that we probably didn't expect back in November as we were talking about drafts is a lot of defensive tackles, because we didn't expect Dexter Lawrence to be requesting a trade. So I know he was semi-unhappy last year. I think you could see it in the body language. The press conferences were awkward. There were rumblings that he was not happy with his contract. But when it became official that it was announced that he requested the trade, what was your thought process on that?
Yeah, based on watching him and breaking him down every single week last year, I have a blurb on him every single week from last season. It's did a lot of study on him, and it did not look like he was very interested in playing as hard as he used to. And some of that, without being in that building, it could be the elbow, it could be the knee. You know, I saw him limping. I was live at MetLife for week 18 against the Cowboys. He was not walking right. The game against New England Patriots was one of the worst games of his entire career. It just looked like he didn't care. And you're like, this is kind of weird for a guy that already got paid. He's definitely one of the leaders of the team. He's never been an intangible problem dating back to his days at Clemson. And it seems like it's a guy that just looked like he wanted a change of scenery. I did think the new hire of John Harbaugh could kind of revitalize him and get him excited. But who knows behind closed doors what truly has been happening over there.
And that's what I thought was so odd too. Like, I think it was pretty evident that no one in the building loved Shane Bowen. And you could kind of see a little bit of a flip was switched when they fire Brian Daboll, a little hesitancy maybe with Kafka and the accountability and the whole thing. And then they end up firing Bowen, and you see that Abdul Carter starts getting his shit together and he looks better immediately. And, Brian Burns continues on this amazing season that he's having. And it just felt like when they made that change, like I kind of felt like, all right, well, if you're Dexter and you're upset about Shane Bowen and you're upset about some of the other things that were going on, now you can look at it and be like, all right, well, we finally got someone that I like. I like Charlie Bullen, have experience with him in the building. We can end the season on a high note, maybe. And then that they're getting a new defensive coordinator this offseason. So at least you have that under your belt. Daboll's gone. You're going to have a new coach. That you're going into next year with this whole new philosophy. And I even think that, at that point, if you're Dexter, you could be thinking, well, they're finally going to get rid of Joe Schoen too. And, supposedly he's got a ton of beef with Joe Schoen, which is whatever. But the fact that I think towards the end of the season, there was no real difference, I don't think, in his play after all of that changed. And again, the press conferences, like, there was so much that was so off about him last year that I'm really starting to think like he just wants out. Like we talked about briefly before this, that whether or not they fire Joe Schoen after the draft, which is this whole rumor thing to, and I don't know, once, let's say he signs his contract and stays on, realistically, how much is he going to have to deal with Joe Schoen? He's probably only going to be here through 2026 anyway. Yeah. But I think like they're going to move him if the time is right. And I heard another interesting thought that was, if Dexter is still on the roster after the draft, then maybe they really will fire Joe Schoen and they'll allow Don Aponte or someone else to just be like, pay Dexter whatever he wants.
Right. Yeah, Joe Schoen definitely has a lot to say. I know everyone thinks, and I do think too, it's John Harbaugh's show right now, but Joe Schoen is definitely the architect of the current roster that has been built over the last few years. And you can absolutely make the argument he still has a lot of say and a lot of power in that building. And that building has been a disaster through most of Dexter Lawrence's career. And I get it. I would understand being unhappy. And he's 28 years old now. He's entering like these like prime years of his career. And he may feel like, hey, with these guys in charge or calling even some of the shots, I'm not going to get to where I want to professionally. I'm not going to win a Super Bowl with this team. Even if everyone's optimistic about Jackson Dart, maybe he's not personally. Jackson Dart still has a lot to prove. Let's not forget that. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that There's nothing worse in a workplace culture than someone who does not want to be there. So at some point, it is going to be a smart move to ship him out of town if the value is there and if the relationship cannot be fixed. Dexter Lawrence is still an incredibly effective defensive tackle. He's capable, not last year, but he's capable of being one of the top 5 defensive tackles in the game. But no player, and John Harbaugh has said this himself, maybe this rubbed him the wrong way. No player is off talks when it comes to potential trades. Every player is included in these conversations. And maybe Dexter Lawrence wanted a little bit more of a ringy endorsement from Harbaugh at some point. But Harbaugh, to me, is more just objective. No player is bigger than the team. That's the way they did not invest a lot of resources into defensive tackles during his tenure at Baltimore. Maybe Dexter Lawrence has a little bit of a pulse there in terms of not getting paid more money. So I think a lot of these things, it's like death by a 1,000 paper cuts. It's a lot of little jabs that Dexter Lawrence is just simply done with.
Yeah. And that was my thing too. Like if the Giants really have that relationship with Dexter where it's really just about the money and they get to 26 million or whatever is a good happy medium for them both. And he signs the contract, he gets in the building and they start moving things along. That's great. But I'm not sold on that being the case. I do think money is a big part of it. And if he gets the certain amount that he's looking for and he can look towards John Harbaugh and say, I feel good about this coaching staff and what we can do moving forward, then that's great. But there were things that I saw last year that I just didn't like, and I can get over it. He's a great football player. If they sign him, so be it. But I think about that attitude, and you look at other players in that locker room and you look at someone like Brian Burns, who's getting paid an assload of money. And I heard him, he was on Patty Traina's podcast this week, and he was saying that he played through a ton of injuries last year and he just didn't care. He was out there every week and he gave it 150% on every single snap. He didn't care if Shane Bowen was the defensive coordinator or if it was someone else. He didn't care how many wins and losses they had. And, if you're Dexter and you're trying to get a new contract, having that type of attitude and showing it on the field is not the right way to go about it. It doesn't matter who the coaching staff is. I was just like, this is a horrible strategy. Like, what are we doing here?
It'd be one thing if Dexter Lawrence did this after the 2024 season where he was all pro. Yes. He was maybe the best defensive tackle in the game, but Dexter Lawrence and his biggest fans can't even tell anybody that he played well in 2025. He had flashes here and there. Of course, a player like that will, but he was not a dominant player at all from when you're kind of zooming out and looking at the entire season. Another negative of succumbing to his so-called demands. When does Brian Burns come in and say, you know what, I want more money too? Mm-hmm. When does Andrew Thomas come in and say, you know what, I want more money too? Because I'm paying Andrew Thomas before both those guys. Yeah. Malik Neighbors is going to come up on his contract extension, believe it or not, in another 2 years. So when you're from the Giants' perspective, if you're going to look at a player who did not play well up to par last year and then also pay him, even though he has one of the biggest contracts in the sport at the position right now, what does that make you look like to the rest of the roster? And very few people talk about that perspective. There is a negative to paying Dexter Lawrence and keeping him around. Even if he plays well and he gets his attitude back together, he was out of shape last year. There's no disputing that. But you're now setting up this foundation for every good player on your team that even though when there's multiple years left on your massive contract, you can still cry in the corner until they come back and give you a bigger check. That's something that needs to be considered.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And I don't think anyone has talked about that. And I don't really blame the Giants. Like, I don't love Joe Schoen and I don't like, a lot of the things that him and, ownership and whatever have done. But I also think he's got 2 years left on his contract. Like, you're supposed to go out there and play. And I get that he's upset about the lack of guaranteed money and whatever, but you signed that contract just a few short years ago. So, if it was really that much of a problem, he must have thought at some point he'd be getting more money. But I don't know. It seems pretty unlikely throughout the NFL that when players have that much time left on their deals, like, they're not getting more money. And even at this time last year, he was supposedly, wanting more money back in the summer. You've got 3 years left on your contract. Like, it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah, it's a business. And, the players will say like, well, we get cut all the time with multiple years left on our contract. These contracts are not like normal work contracts or baseball contracts. And again, it's always up for negotiation, but at least come off a good year before you tell someone that you need to be the highest paid defensive tackle in the game as a 350-pound defensive tackle that's having a hard time walking week 18, who also did not play up to par. I mean, what if Dexter Lawrence right now has already seen his best football? What if we're never going to see 2024, 2023 again? Do you still want to pay him? Even all the biggest fans of Dexter Lawrence, do you still want to pay him more money in the prime opportunity of building your roster with funds because you're not paying a quarterback? Do you want to waste some more of that on a player that's on the downslope of his career? I don't think that's the case. I think Dexter Lawrence can still play at a high level, but you have to ask yourself this question. Is this the best have we already seen the best of Dexter Lawrence? Mm-hmm. And if there's even a little bit of thought in there, to me, you don't pay him more. You make him play or you trade him.
And if he really wants 30+ million a year, like I get that we have a quarterback on a rookie deal and the salary cap, at the end of the day doesn't really matter, but it all comes down to the precedence, right? Like, is he really worth $30 million a year when you are going to have to pay Malik Neighbors? You're going to have to extend Andrew Thomas. Like, it's not just paying Dexter Lawrence and then la-di-da, we move on. Like, we have all these other players that they have to consider at that point. So
yeah. And you're going to have to build the interior offensive line in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, based on what they do in the draft the next week, they have holes that need to be paid in the next year or two. And you have to be careful with the spending just because someone was really good 2-3 years ago.
Yeah. I want to get into draft stuff, but first when you mentioned the offensive line, we have to talk about Daniel Falele because I saw that signing. It was like, we kind of probably all knew it was coming at some point. Yeah. And I would care less about it if they had signed GVR. And I know there's still a possibility that they could sign GVR, but I know he's okay against the run. He reminds me of Evan Neal. Like, the bad is horrific and he's okay against the run, but he's been in the NFL for 4 years and he's been coached by John Harbaugh. And my thought process is just like, I get that he started the last 2 years. That doesn't really make him good. We've seen a lot of really bad offensive linemen start for the Giants. It doesn't mean that they're good football players. They just had to start for whatever reason. From watching his tape and what you've seen on him, is there any potential for improvement there? Do you think with this whole new coaching staff and, what they're going to try and do with this player development stuff?
I do think there's hope here with him. Do I think he's a long-term solution? I don't. The Giants don't either. They signed him to a 1-year deal after the entire league passed on him multiple times. But I think he could be a solid Band-Aid. What I like about him is that he does fit into the profile of a head coach that wants their offensive line to be powerful, big, own the line of scrimmage. Now, when you have big, powerful, own the line of scrimmage, you're going to lose some on athleticism more often than not, and that's what he does. But one thing he doesn't do is he doesn't end up on the ground often. He's not the most balanced athlete. The guy who came into the NFL at just under 400 pounds. I mean, he's a massive kid. But he stays on his feet, and I do see progress. I scouted him coming out of Minnesota. He is a better player now than he was back then. And I don't view this as a downgrade to the offensive line. I wanted an upgrade this year, and there is still hope with the NFL draft, but I don't view this as a worse offensive line at all with him at right guard / the level of competition. It's going to be a 4-man race as of right now, and they still could add in the NFL draft. But he does play long. He does play powerful. He is very similar to a prospect that's coming out of Miami this year, Markel Bell, in that he just needs to understand how big he is. He doesn't need to overextend. He doesn't even need to reach. He just needs to be balanced and be ready to punch at any given point. And that's where the losses that are ugly, that he does have plenty on tape, it's almost always the same reason. He's just overextending himself, and he's not that kind of centered, balanced athlete, but he stays on his feet. And he does have a lot of good tape. His best plays, by the way, his best snaps, by far better than what the Giants had at right guard last year, the last 2 years. Not even close. Okay. So there is some hope, and he's a young player that has worked under Harbaugh. We have to give him a little bit of credibility there, that he could be an upgrade over what we saw, not just a kind of a equal to what we saw last year.
Yeah. So usually when they make these types of signings, like especially after re-signing Neal and Azudu, I'm like, that doesn't mean that they're done at guard or offensive line. So when it comes to guards in this draft class, are there any players that after the season until now, between the Senior Bowl, Combine, etc., have moved up your board?
Yeah, Keelan Rutledge from Georgia Tech is a guy that I had eyes on in September, October, and I was like, wow, this guy's a pretty nasty road grader. Georgia Tech has that reputation of running the ball a ton, and he fit in really well there. But I kind of stereotyped him a little bit in that players from that program and his general profile of what he looked like. He couldn't really pass protect, not a good athlete, not a good enough athlete. But his tape against Georgia this year, which is a defensive front seven, I should say, filled with future NFL players, he was playing more than he needed to in terms of speed and twitch. I mean, the Georgia defenders had a really hard time getting off his hands, and it's not just because this guy has country strong hands and he's big and physical. He moves his feet exceptionally well. He bends well. Then he goes to the Combine Pro Day and absolutely blows up the workouts. He's actually one of the best athletes at the position in the entire draft. So what a guy that I used to look at as like a round 4, round 5 guy, I think he's a credible day 2 option, maybe a little bit of a reach in round 2, but I'd rather reach for offensive line talent than sit there round 3, round 4 if they end up getting a third and not having anybody left. Objective 1 of this offseason to me was supply Jackson Dart with more support, better offensive line play, and another playmaker. I still think they have room for both, but I prefer getting another body up front that you think can be a long-term solution at guard.
Yeah. When I had done my mock, I mostly picked interior offensive linemen, but a thought process that I had, because there are going to be some good tackles coming out, is with John Harbaugh in the building, do they reconsider Marcus Bowe and think about swinging him inside to the right guard? And then they draft, one of these guys, I forget his name now, I'll have to pull it up. One of the guys that I drafted had potential swing tackle capability. I think it was Steven Trost.
Trost from Missouri. Yeah, he's another inside-out hybrid. One thing I would say about Bowe to guard, again, that's where I projected him coming out of Purdue, and right now he's still at tackle. Harbaugh usually does pursue size, like oversized interior guys, especially at guard. He'll give a little at center, but I think the general profile of offensive linemen in general, but specifically the interior guys, are all over 330 pounds. And Marcus Bowe, if there is a weakness to his game that showed up last year at tackle, he's not very stout. He doesn't have the strongest anchor. He's not going to move guys off the ball. So I think in their vision, he's more of a swing tackle, maybe long-term solution for Jermaine Illuminor's spot in 2 to 3 years from now. But I do like him as a guy that, hey, injuries arise every year on the offensive line. Mm-hmm. He can project to multiple spots inside and outside. Those guys are invaluable. But I do think if they go pursue offensive line in this draft, it's going to be more size related. It's going to be guys that can almost not as big as Falale, but same profile. Evan Neal, Josh Ezeudu. I think the reason those guys came back, where they probably had high draft outlooks on them coming out of college in their respective years, but they have size. And I think that Harbaugh and his clan, they think like, hey, if a guy has size, he's got power, we can work with that. We can develop some of the other things. So I think that's where they're going to lean offensive line.
Were there any other guards in later rounds or interior offensive linemen that you saw that fit that mold that Harbaugh likes of the, 6'7" and taller or bigger?
Yeah, DJ Campbell from Texas is a guy, very mixed reviews on him. I personally like him. I think I had him as my 9th rated guard in the class. A lot of starts at Texas. Again, heavy-footed, gets caught out of position, has a hard time recovering, but just a mauler, a guy that moves the line of scrimmage every single snap. Another one is Jalen Farmer from Kentucky. He's has a little bit more popularity behind him. Dare I say, I think he's going to be a day 2 pick. I don't know if he'll make it to round 4, but if he does, that's a guy you get all over. Someone that was a stud early in his career at Alabama was Jaden Roberts. Absolute freak show of an athlete, length, width, foot speed, power, but a guy that he struggled with injuries. He actually lost his starting job this past season with the new coaching staff, but Nick Saban brought him in. He was an early starter early in his career, dealt with some injuries, had a hard time getting back on the field, but he's a guy that could probably wind up on a practice squad for a year, and it's kind of a safe pick. I don't think anyone's going to put him on their active roster. Those are guys that I do like day 3 if you can get them. Roberts, the one I just talked about, could probably be had in round 6.
Okay. When I did my mock, I picked Jalen Farmer. And what I liked about him is that he does seem to have that mauling capability. And I actually traded from 105 to 127 and was able to get him there. But of course,
great.
Not.
Yeah, all it takes is one GM to really like him. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, these offensive linemen can come off in any order. I mean, because so many different teams want different things. They have different schemes. They have different situations. Some teams only want to draft day 3 linemen that have inside-out versatility because they can project at both spots. Farmer is a guard all the way. Fun fact about him, he's got one of the longest, I think he had 34-plus inch arms, which is really long for guards, and he had the highest bench press number of all linemen at the combine. And that's incredibly rare to see a guy that has a lot of length. And that shows up on tape. His upper body strength is unreal. I mean, again, another tape against Georgia, just mauling guys at the point of attack. He just doesn't always apply that to pass protection. His footwork is a little sloppy. But again, I think that's the kind of profile this new regime is going to want to work with. They always have in Baltimore. They always had day 3 linemen kind of developing it behind the scenes. And so I would bet a big money at some point they're going to use the pick on a day 3 offensive lineman.
Yeah, and that was my thought process too, is I know there's so much talk at 5. Well, they could go offensive lineman, like Harbaugh's probably not going to take a wide receiver, Carnell Tate's off the table, whatever. And I remember hearing Justin Pennick say that under Harbaugh, I think it was 50% of his offensive lineman draft picks came between rounds 3 to 5. So that was my thought process too, is maybe they're going to skip offensive line at 5 and focus on the trenches a little bit later because that's something he likes to do.
Yeah, I have it right here. In 18 years, first round offensive lineman 3 times, second round 2 times. All right, now we have third, sixth, 6 times, fourth round 7 times, fifth round 5 times, sixth round 5 times, seventh round 3 times. So definitely later in the draft is where he biased a lot of his offensive line picks.
Yeah. So probably rule that out at 5. What do you think is where they go at 5?
It's right now, if they stay put, I do think their preference might be to move down a little bit so they can get that 3rd round pick that they missed out on from trading up from Jackson Dart, which they're happy about, I'm sure. I think it's going to be Sonny Styles or Caleb Downs. It just makes sense to me that Harbaugh's going to try to get his defensive identity kind of set up, right? When he was in Baltimore, they used their first pick in his first year on a quarterback, Joe Flacco. Next year, a running back, Ray Rice. But then the next 5 years, the first pick of their drafts were all on the defensive side. And Harbaugh, he talks about trenches all the time, but he likes to kind of get some free agents, get some veterans, day 3 picks in the trenches. I think he wants studs in the middle and the spine of his defense at the 2nd and 3rd level. And we saw that multiple times. And Sonny Styles, Caleb Downs, those 2 guys, whether or not I prefer them at that spot is irrelevant. I think that's his philosophy. Is remember, he, more than us, more than most fans, will be looking at the next 2, 3, 4 years. This is year 1 for him. Mm-hmm. He's not gonna go back and be like, oh, do you remember in 23 we were so bad here? Do you remember in 24 we just didn't have the playmaker there? We didn't have the extra pass rusher there, the offensive lineman here. He is like, what do I want this team to be 2, 3 years from now? And Sonny Styles kind of fits the profile. He always had a big-time inside linebacker. Tremaine Edmonds is okay. He's not the big-time guy that I think he wants. Sonny Styles to me, and Caleb Downs is more of the vocal leader, the intellectual leader, the brains of the business, right? So if one of those guys is going to be there, I think it's got to be Styles or Downs. Love would be a backup option if he does fall to 5.
Yeah. What is your preference between Styles and Downs?
It's definitely Styles, and I think it will be his as well. He's a big guy. I've heard Harbaugh say this before, that when December, January comes around, speed matters less, size and power matter more. And that kind of ability, that kind of talent, it doesn't come around often. 6'4", 6'5", 240 plus pounds, runs like the wind. He can play a lot of different roles. It's not Isaiah Simmons. Don't bring up his name. He is a real football player, a guy that can play the sideline to sideline. He can obliterate blocks between the tackles. He got so much better from August 30th, week 1 against Texas, to December 31st against Miami. Those game tapes, when I watched both of them back to back, they were night and day how much better he got at reading the inside run. He's a real football player. And I think that the Giants already did a lot at safety this offseason. I think he can kind of patch a few things together. You bring up the name Kyle Hamilton. You say, oh, that might be why he wants Caleb Downs. I think Sonny Styles can play the Kyle Hamilton role. That I actually think they're actually very comparable to what Harbaugh does with that kind of Joker type role. You're going to see him all over the field. You're going to see him on the edge. You're going to see him blitzing the A-gap. You're going to see him dropping coverage. That is what Sonny Styles to me is, where I think Downs, I just don't think he has the size to play that kind of role.
Also, Styles was a safety first. And I wonder if there's anything, if that contributes to, Harbaugh's love him, or if they end up picking Styles, if that's in the back of his head, like maybe I could use him a little bit more in versatile ways than maybe someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. He's probably the most versatile defender in this class, and that can get overused this time of year. Almost sometimes, like Arvell Reese, I would even say this, like you don't really know what he is yet. So you kind of just say he's versatile, and then everyone's like, oh, okay, like cool. Styles has played so many different positions at a high level, but he has a home. His home is middle linebacker. That's where he'll line up. But then in specific looks, with a defense that has a lot of additions, a lot of different looks that they're going to potentially be able to give, you need that one guy that can float around a little bit here and there. And that's what Styles is.
I love Sonny Styles. I would be thrilled if they drafted him at 5. When I did my mock and I got to my last pick, which was 194, I took his brother just for fun because I'm like, it's the end of the draft. Who cares? And while I was doing some research on him, I'm like, first of all, you can never have too many corners. So I liked that. Also like the stories that I've heard about the relationship between the brothers. I like the competitive fire. I think they can both bring something to the table from that aspect. And then he's also an elite athlete like his brother. I'm like, this whole family is a bunch of freaks, like in a great way. It's amazing. Have you watched any film on him? What do you think about Lorenzo?
Yeah, their stories from their childhood is very funny in terms, like it seemed like they were training for that NFL combine that we watched at age 5, like running with parachutes and dad did a good job. Dad played in the NFL too. They eat, slept, and breathe football. But Styles, to me, he's probably going to be more nickel. He might be a safety because he has a really hard time unlocking his hips in coverage, meaning he has a hard time turning with balance and staying on a straight line. He can be beat in vertical coverage a lot. I think he's better looking downhill at the action, a little undersized for a safety role. So I think he's going to be one of these hybrid corner safeties, which are becoming more and more common. His future is probably going to be more on special teams and the back end of a depth chart. But where you have him 6th round, you can never argue taking the fastest player at the NFL combine at the end of the draft, because at some point you got to shoot your shot. And that's something that I would love to gamble on every single year in the draft is gamble on speed. It usually does not work at the end of the draft for any reason, but I'd rather make a fast mistake.
Well, and the other thing I thought too, when I was researching him was one of his player comparisons is Greg Newsome. So I was like, well, if they like Greg Newsome, then this is an interesting choice here. And there was something else that I was going to say about him playing corner, but I don't remember what it was. But either way, I just was kind of thinking through that thought process of if they don't go corner any higher and decide to bring someone in that late round. Oh, that Joe Shane he's drafted corners quite a bit in later rounds. And Trey Hawkins ended up being a starter, which, was not because he was great, but, him and Art Green, these are guys who have been later round picks who ended up getting some good playing time that I have to think, I hope that they go corner earlier than that.
Yeah.
But why not add another one to the mix?
Yeah, and a guy that brings special teams value. You hear a lot of these guys in these post-draft press conferences talk about this a lot, is that at the end of the draft, your roster's filled for the most part. You want to find guys that can add some contribution to special teams. I mean, it's important. We've seen it here with the Giants over the years. If you have guys that can't tackle, can't hit, don't have range, don't have speed, it's a problem. And it kind of sets you back on a team that doesn't have a lot of margin to work with. And I think that's why I bring up special teams with Styles. I think he can get the job done there, and I think it's going to boost his value draft weekend.
Definitely. While we're on the subject of corners, let's talk about some of who are your favorites for the Giants. I think the last time that we had talked, you had mentioned Dermod McCoy was the top one coming out, even though he had missed the 2025 season, right? Due to injuries. So I know obviously there's a lot of talk about Mansour Delay, and he seems to be a crowd favorite, especially for a lot of Giants fans in the conversation of trading back. But if they don't go corner that high, who do you like? Maybe someone at 37 or later?
Yeah, round 2 is definitely an option for this draft. And again, every time you start talking about specifically who this team's going to take, everyone's got to be on the same page here. They're not going to solve every problem in this NFL draft. They're definitely not going to. So if they go 2 defenders, yes, everyone's going to have a complaint about the wide receivers and the offensive line. If they go offensive line, wide receiver, you're going to have a complaint about the run defense and lack of depth at corner. The goal here is just to find the best player that's going to help your team this year and in the coming years. And if the player checks those boxes, no complaining allowed, right? And corner can actually absolutely be a part of the second round discussion. And there is a cluster of 7 corners beyond the first 2 that are all almost within 1 or 2 points of each other. And some are better scheme fits and situational fits for the Giants. But my question is, do you want to use the second round pick on that position, or do you hope that someone can fall into early day 3, round 4, or do the Giants trade back at any point and get a third round pick? That is where I would prefer them to use the corner pick. But if they do go with someone, I like Chris Johnson from San Diego State, a guy that doesn't have as much of the sexiness to him, the fast 40, the big time length. He didn't even play at a big time program. He could have. He turned down Big Ten and SEC programs in the portal last year that he did not enter. They were recruiting him. Just a guy that is so smooth and dependable. And sometimes I prefer this kind of corner. Not the one that had 9 interceptions last year. Not the one that's 6'4" and runs a 4.3. The one that just does everything at a high level. His back pedal, his hips, the ball location, the ability to close in on a pass, the click and close, everything. And everything about his game at the Senior Bowl on tape is just sparkling clean. That's the name I think I would zero in on in the second round. If you want to be more upside based, Brandon Cisse from South Carolina. That's the team that's the guy that I think has a really high upside. One of the youngest players in the draft, did not play a lot, but a physical, big, fast kid that needs some runway. You want to clean up some of the footwork issues, but he's not really probably going to play in front of Newsome and Adebo and Phillips, maybe even Banks in 2012-25. Let him kind of get that first year underneath his feet before you put him on the field in 2027.
When I saw that he was meeting with Seattle, I was like, they're going to draft him. Yep. Him and Evaluator, they played together. He doesn't have to play over Devin Witherspoon. They can take the time to develop him. But I have kept my eyes on him because he is one of the South Carolina guys coming out that I was like, we need a corner. He'd be great.
He would be a good pick, and he's really physical. One thing about Harbaugh that he did pursue a lot out of corners when he was in Baltimore was guys that can locate and make plays on the ball. Ball skills. He doesn't want corner. He would never draft it, in my opinion. Deonte Banks couldn't find the ball, can't make a play on the ball, a lot of penalties. Cisse, Chris Johnson, Keontae Scott, Dalen Everett. Those are guys that I think can have those traits, the height, weight, speed numbers that they want, but also very good ball skills.
The amount of times that I've heard from Joe Shane that he likes ball hawks and guys who can force turnovers in college is going to translate to the NFL level. I'm like,
Tyler Newman.
Okay, Tyler Newman, we're waiting on you, buddy. Like at least Dane Belton forced a few of those. But I was listening to Burns was telling Patty that he already feels like training camp is going to be very different this year. They are going to be focused on being very physical. And, like I think we've all heard multiple times is that they want to be able to stop the run and run the ball. I love Lee Hunter at 37. He's one of my favorite picks there, but I think there are a lot of good defensive tackles. Who are some of your favorites? And I think it's so hard to really predict where the Giants are going to go with that. I think they could pick one at 37. It could be Lee Hunter. They've met with him a couple times, or at this rate, they could wait until, round 4 and go for someone there if there's someone you like in that area too.
Yeah, I mean, this is where the Dexter Lawrence conversation kind of sways the conversation. If you know you're going to trade him, you almost have to draft a defensive tackle somewhat early. And this is a good year to do it. Again, very similar to the corners, with the exception of I don't have any first-round grades on defensive tackles in this draft class. Caden McDonald included, Peter Woods. They're all day 2 guys to me, which is a starter in the NFL, a year 1 starter, but a little bit more specialty-based. But a guy that I think has a Dalvin Tomlinson-type profile, meaning – I'm very secure with the fact that he's going to be a good enough player to be a starting defensive lineman, but he has traits and tools that could evolve into someone that ends up getting a big payday in free agency down the road. And it's Christian Miller from Georgia. Just tall, big, long, heavy-handed. They teach defensive line there so well. These guys come out so well schooled. A guy that moves the line of scrimmage often. Dominique Orange from Iowa State. He is a great plan B to those that want Caden McDonald to be your run stuffer inside. I think in some ways, Dominic Orange actually has a little bit more potential in that role because the Iowa State defense was a little weird to watch. They had him do a lot of weird things. And if you could just let him be that over center, control the line of scrimmage type, he could do that at a high level. Lee Hunter, I like. I'm a little worried about the lack of lower body power and strength. He's not very stout against run defense, but he's a playmaker. He gets beyond the line of scrimmage because he's he's light beneath the waist. A lot of his mass is above the waist. The last name that I would be intrigued to take a chance on is Caleb Banks from Florida, only because the tape and the performance at the Senior Bowl, when he's on, when he's healthy, when he's balanced and ready to rock, he's dominant. He's not just good. I thought for a second he was the best player at the Senior Bowl. There is a medical issue with him, and he is big. He is heavy. That does concern me a little bit. But those are guys that I love in that day 2 area for the Giants.
Okay. I know that I was listening to Big Blue Banter, and I know that they love Caden McDonald too. I've heard quite a bit about him and him being a stud. I have to ask about Nick Barrett because he's a South Carolina guy, and I ended up drafting him. I think with one of my early 6th round picks, and in one of the trades that I did, and they graded me a D+.
Oh, come on. What do they know?
No, I was like, come on. Like, I usually, the rest of them were like a C or better. I got good grades on them, but I was like, you know what? I still feel like we need help at the defensive line position. Again, they brought in this whole coaching staff that the big focus is on player development. You know, we talked a lot about Darius Alexander last year, that he had some good technique and stuff like that, but obviously things that needed to be improved upon. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe Nick Barrett could be the same thing, just a later round pick.
Yeah, I like Nick Barrett. And what you need on the defensive line often are just guys that can get the job done. They don't need to be superstars. And Darius Alexander kind of holds the keys to the bus of like, what do they think about him, right? Mm-hmm. Do they see the upside? John Harbaugh did not draft him. But in regard to Barrett, my question that I have on my report right here is the guy played 39 games in college before he had a sack and before he had a start. So he was there. He was just in college for such a long time, and they weren't even viewing him as capable of starting on a defensive line that didn't have a ton of NFL talent. They have had a couple guys, right? So what's the deal there? Like, that's always kind of something that I want to pay attention to. That's kind of not on a stat sheet. Is why did it take him so long to kind of get into that starter role? You're not drafting him to rush the passer. But he can be a 2-gap defender that can keep linebackers clean. You're not going to hear his name called often on game day, but you win with guys like that. You win with Barry Cofield type players where, hey, you don't hear their names on Sundays often, but you know the players around him and behind him appreciate them. And he does a lot of that dirty work. So that reason alone, he's a big 312 pounds, 6'3", long arms, wide wingspan. He's got the NFL body. Sign me up day 3, especially round 6. Sign me up.
Yeah. I feel like that's going to be a big area for them where they really focus on depth pieces. So I'm curious to see what they do. I want to talk a little bit about linebacker in the chance that they don't go Sonny Styles, and then we can switch gears to offense. Jacob Rodriguez and Anthony Hill are 2 guys that I love at 37. I know the Giants have met with Anthony Hill on multiple occasions, so it sounds like they're, you know, at the very least interested in him. And then after the Senior Bowl, I really loved Kyle Lewis, who seems to be more of a 4th round pick, definitely has some things to improve on, but both him and Jacob Rodriguez at the Senior Bowl were very active in forcing turnovers. And again, back to Joe Schoen, we just know he loves that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if it was up to him, he'd be drafting one of those guys in the 2nd round if they don't go Sonny Styles. Me personally, I'm a little lower on them than the consensus, but I still think they're starting linebackers at the next level. Rodriguez lacks length, misses a lot of tackles. That combination right there always scares me off. It has burned me in the past when guys just don't play with good length and they don't make all the tackles in space that they should. But again, a guy that just right place, right time. And what does that tell you? It's not just the production, it's they know the game. And linebacker, to me, the instincts are so important. You can give yourself that 1 to 2 foot head start post snap all the time. You beat blockers to a point, and then you present yourself to make plays. You create opportunities for yourself. And that's what he did. He capitalized on those. Anthony Hill is the guy I have a 1st round grade on him. And when you talk about the tools, height, weight, speed, explosion, production, run and pass as a pass rusher, he's right there with Reese and Styles. In some ways, he actually has a little bit more production on some of the advanced stats that I look at and try to keep track of over a 2-year period than both of those guys. He's not as big, he's not as stout, but I will say this, he is more physical than Sonny Styles. Like he imposes his will. He tries to knock you back. He has more knockback tackles than Styles. Styles has more of a drag to the ground type tackling style. And they're both fine. I don't think one's worse than the other, but Anthony Hill, I like linebackers that kind of have they chew glass, right? They're kind of just almost a little messed up in the head. And Hill does that. He kind of brings personality to the defense. In terms of Kyle Lewis, I mean, look, the guy's 6 foot 220 and he can't take on blocks. At Pittsburgh, he actually played like a nickel role. He was outside the tackle box a ton. So he didn't have to deal with linemen and fullbacks and tight ends. And when he did, he struggled. And I think in the NFL, I think that's going to be a role. A lot of these teams in the NFL are now trying to shift their nickel defender, their slot defender, to a bigger Nick Manwari type defender, because offenses are just running all over these defensive backs. So he's like a specialist to me. He's not a starting linebacker, Kyle Lewis, but he's a guy that can fit into that role where he can cover, he can run with guys, he can spy the quarterback. But if the team does opt to run against that look, he can be a much better factor than a corner.
I do like a lot of those guys, but I am just hoping that the Giants pick Sonny Styles and that we don't have to worry about any of that.
Same. I think that would you can cross a lot of these guys off until day 3. If you can find a special teamer or a replacement for Darius Musel. But you got to be prepared for anything. Sonny Styles might not even be there. I mean, I think there's a shot Tennessee takes him at 4. So it's not even about passing on him. He just might not be there. So again, these guys know that you have to have plan A, B, C, D in every round.
If the Cowboys jump in front of us and draft him, I might jump off my roof. Between Micah Parsons, Devonta Smith, can someone help us out for once here and just not allow that to happen? Because that's the rumor, is that they like him. Hopefully it's Arvell Reese or someone else, because now without Micah Parsons, they could definitely use another edge rusher. But I'm like, if they do that, I'm going to lose my fucking mind.
Reese makes more sense to me in that there is a shot he falls to 3 or 4. I would say a good shot. And Dallas might look at him as that's what we used to have in Micah Parsons, the off ball that's going to transition to the elite edge defender. I don't see them making a 12 up to 5 or 4 or 3. That's a big jump. And I don't think this is a team that can give up both their first round picks for a lot. I just don't see it, because they need so much help on the defensive side of the ball. So I'm not sold they're going to trade up that high, but if they did, I do think it'd be for Reese.
Yeah. I hope for our sake it is.
Yeah, for you. I'll pray for you. Just
I'm going to the draft, and if I have to witness that live, I'm really going to lose it.
Oh, man. Don't get yourself on camera out there and do something stupid.
Yeah, right? Oh my God. I'm already I had to mentally prepare myself that if they draft Jeremiah Love, I will not lose my shit when they pan to the Giants.
Just stone face, just sitting there trying to not yell.
Yeah, I don't want to be that person, but we'll see. Let's switch gears over to wide receivers, because the FanDuel Sportsbook has Carnell Tate being the first wide receiver off the table. I think we probably all agree that that's the case at -370. Those are the odds right now. The podcast is brought to you by Believe Network and FanDuel Sportsbook. So if you want to take those odds, go ahead, download the app, and always bet responsibly. They have Jordan Tyson next at +550 and Mekhi Lemon at +700. What do you think? Does that sound about right to you? I think we probably all agree that Tate is the first one off the board. But I've heard so much recently about Casey Concepcion. It seems like he's been growing a lot in popularity throughout the eyes of people in the NFL world.
Yeah, he's got a cool story. Right before I came on, I think he wrote for the Players Tribune. He wrote about a letter to all 32 teams why he should be the wide receiver 1 in this class. The irony is that he said, I catch everything thrown my way, and that's definitely not true. I think that's the biggest weakness in his game is his hands, but I'll let him have his moment. My one argument against Jordan Tyson being number 2 wide receiver off the board he hasn't worked out. You don't know his 40. You don't know his hamstring deal. I do think his tape is the best tape of the wide receivers in this class. Slightly different way of producing than Carnell Tate. Carnell Tate's more of a downfield possession type guy, deep threat, where Tyson, I think, is more of the Odell Beckham, kind of get open, make some plays after the catch, have the highlight reels with the route running. But I'm nervous about a guy that's had the injury history that he had. Mekhi Lemon, to me, is a really good fit for the Los Angeles Rams and with their first round pick. And if they go receiver, I think they would take him over Jordan Tyson because of how physical he is. Mekhi Lemon is anything but injured. He's anything but soft. If anything, he's too physical. He's too much attitude, which some teams love. That swagger, that dog, to quote Brian Dable. That I think Mekhi Lemon's going to be the second receiver taken over Jordan Tyson because of those medicals.
And Mekhi Lemon has met with the Giants. He's the only player as of right now who's met with the Giants on 3 separate occasions. So, Shane has talked about how they're open to trade back and they're open to move around and stuff like that. But I think it's pretty unlikely that they end up with Mekhi Lemon. So if they don't go receiver at 5, you think Casey Concepcion or someone like that is in play for them at 37?
I do. And it seems like the Giants are going more towards slot receivers with some of the meetings they have. I don't want to read too much into it. Part of me says it doesn't make sense with the Isaiah Likely signing. But again, you don't want to have him only playing slot. You need to have some more speed in there as well, a little bit more quickness. So I do think Concepcion makes a lot of sense from that regard. He makes plays with the ball in his hands, scored touchdowns as a returner, as a rusher, as a receiver. But when I look at the wide receiver group and I look at day 2 specifically, the name that continues to pop up in my head is Jeremy Bernard from Alabama. Just a guy that is physical. Again, you're not going to draft a wide receiver because he's a good blocker, but I'd like to throw this in there. He's the best blocking wide receiver in this draft. He tries hard. He obliterates guys. And I think Harbaugh is going to love that. You look at the best running teams in football, their wide receivers are weapons as blockers. They do it. San Francisco, LA Rams. So Bernard, and as a route runner, I think he's one of the cleanest guys. He has a 2% drop rate, one of the best in the league. He's 6 foot, a little over, I think 208 pounds. I mean, that's like he's bigger than Malik Neighbors. He's more physical than Malik Neighbors. And he doesn't need to be a downfield threat. I do think he struggled finding the ball downfield, but he gives you the option to kind of move Malik in and out a little bit because Jeremy Bernard can do that. And I've always compared him to Chris Godwin. That would be my day 2 preference at receiver.
Yeah, he kicked my South Carolina's ass in that game. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, great, here we go, Alabama, of course. But that was something that after the Giants signed Likely that Harbaugh said repeatedly was, I think there's this narrative that Isaiah Likely's not a good blocker. And Harbaugh was like, absolutely not. He's a great blocker. Like, it's one of the reasons why we love him and he's such a good football player, whatever. So, yeah, I do think blocking is going to be something that they focus on with that. Do you see them going after any tight ends in later rounds? I think that's the one position I probably didn't make a priority in the draft. Like, I didn't draft any when I did it. And I just, I know there were Wright from Ole Miss was a guy that I had kept up with a bit.
Baltimore always had 3 or 4 tight ends. And that's like, I don't always want to use Baltimore as the template, but I'm trying to use something, right? In terms of like, what could they use? What does Harbaugh think about Fedoni? Like, and they brought back Manhurts and what he's there for, the culture, the leadership, the blocking. So right now I would say they run 3 deep with Fedoni, who, if they want to go 4 deep, he's that guy. Do they like him? A lot of people did not like him last year because of the knee issues. So I don't think that the Giants will even look at a tight end for their first 3 or 4 picks. But at the end of the draft, if there's a guy that they think they can stash on the practice squads who doesn't take up a roster spot, or someone that can give Fedoni a real run for his money, I would say they'll be biased towards the blocking tight ends at the end of the draft, not another receiving option that kind of just fell through the fingertips of other teams. So Will Kachmarek, Ohio State, he was their blocking tight end, but he tested very well. He did have a couple big plays on tape. I love Oscar Delp from Georgia. He was supposed to be the Brock Bowers replacement. Quarterback play there was so bad that I feel like we kind of a little underrated in the process, but I have a feeling he'll be come off the board in the first 4 rounds. And at some point, I just don't think that this is a position I think Giants will likely punt on until next year, unless there's a supreme value in the 6th.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see their real thought process on Theo, because he's also someone who is not one of their draft picks. He's bigger. He's an okay blocker.
Yeah, it's evolving. He's getting better. He's 6'6", 260, and he's got some pretty physical hand, and he tries hard. I think that's what Harbaugh wants at a tight ends. He tries hard. He has developed there. I think he's going to like that. They've gone after that classic white tight end several times. They always had those guys in Baltimore. I think he's a fit for that role. But again, he might not be here long term. You're going to have to pay him next year or the year after.
Yeah, which is crazy.
I know. It happened so fast.
Yeah, I feel like we just drafted him.
Yeah.
All right. Are there any? One last player I knew I just should have brought him up earlier was Thaddeus Dixon, is the cornerback from UNC who I drafted in a later round, who again was someone that I had seen at the Senior Bowl, who had an interception, has good hands. Maybe he was the Greg Newsome comparison, not Lorenzo Styles.
Okay. That most likely that was the comparison. They have 2 corners at UNC, well schooled. Bill Belichick coached them. Clean. I remember watching him early in the year and everything looked clean on his tape. He tested better than I thought he would because I didn't think he was very fast on tape. Again, you got to be a little careful these 40 times, but the capability is there to play fast. Now, does it translate? And again, that's what you're going for on day 3. You're finding guys that have height, weight, speed numbers, that little bit of production in college, and that's what he does have. He's a guy that you could stash in the back of the cornerback group. You're not going to need to work him into the rotation early on, but a guy that I do think is absolutely worth. If you're talking end of the draft, you won't get any arguments from me on Dixon. He's a good player.
Yeah. They brought him in for a top 30 visit too. So let's round out on 2 things. The first thing is we know that Joe Schoen typically only drafts players that he's had top 30 visits with, especially in rounds 1 and 2, but that's not so much the case with Harbaugh. Do you have any concerns over the fact that they did not have a top 30 visit with Sonny Styles? What's your thought process on all that? Are you reading into any of that or no?
No, because Sonny Styles, from everything I've read and heard and listened to, there are no questions about him. And earlier when I said these guys get 30 visits or extra visits because what you're unsure about something, could be attitude, it could be intelligence, it could be medical. There aren't any questions on Styles. There aren't any questions on Downs other than the knee. So what do you gain by bringing Styles into the building? I think nothing. And trust me, Shane knows that he has a predictor on attached to his name with everyone thinks that they're only going to bring in their draft picks via the top 30 visits, or I should call it the 30 visit. If they know they want Styles, they don't need to bring him in. They don't need to waste time, energy, effort on him. You already know who he is. He's another adult in the room. I think he's 21 going on 40 already. So I don't think there's any issues there with not bringing in Styles.
Okay. Because I noticed that they did the same thing with Downs, that they didn't bring him either. There were a lot of wide receivers that they brought in and some guys that could be drafted in other rounds. Of course, Jeremiah Love. So that was a big talking point. And then the last question I have for you is, are there any other players that you are high on that we haven't talked about or that you think are good fits for the Giants or that you just think that people should be interested in watching?
Yeah, there's a tackle. Again, I'm not looking for a starting tackle, but you want depth. And Markel Bell fits the profile of these massive offensive linemen that Baltimore constantly went after to say, like, hey, if we can develop you for a year or two, maybe we have a very quality backup. Maybe if Andrew Thomas goes down again, we don't have to freak out and lose every single game without him on the field. And Markel Bell is all-time big, one of the biggest prospects in the history of the game. And his progress from 24 to 25 was immense. And what he did is what a lot of big guys have a hard time doing is they don't overextend. They don't try to make up for the fact that it takes them a long time to move their feet. It almost doesn't matter because they're so big. And that's something that Markel Bell showed me with all these extra games against really quality high level defenses in their national championship run that they almost won, that he was one of the main guys. Everyone was talking about Maui Noah. I thought Bell played awesome. And he's going to be our 4th or 5th round pick. And he's actually opened some eyes in pre-draft workouts as well. So that's a guy that I think, again, day 3, to pay attention to. Another one would be a D tackle from Missouri, Chris McClellan, just big, thick, long, broke out in 2025, but he was not a bad player prior to 2025. He's a pass rusher. He's a run defender. He's a penetrator. I love defensive linemen that on tape, they show me a lot of different roles of the position. And that's exactly what his tape is filled with in the SEC. The last one is a guy that I'm personally higher on, also D tackle, Bryson Eason, a 320-pound nose tackle from Tennessee who showed up there as an outside linebacker. Then they moved him to D end. Then they moved him to 3-tech, an undersized defensive tackle. The guy just kept on putting on weight, and he's probably the most violent football player in this draft in terms of just obliterating blockers at the point of attack. Doesn't really know what he's doing as a pass rusher yet. Still relatively new to the position, by the way. So, and he's got some of that baseline twitch that a lot of D tackles just don't have. Explosive power is what I have written next to him. So those are a few guys I'd love to see the Giants scoop up day 3, at least just one of them.
Yeah. Okay. I'm excited. We're only a week away now. It's going to be a very interesting weekend. Can people still get the draft guide on Ourlads?
My recommendation, we are having some postal service. I won't get in trouble for saying that. Postal service issues. Like they're struggling, that company. And so what you could do is you can order a PDF and it's delivered to you right away. I do have some people that if you contact me on X and you could show me that you ordered it and it has not received yet, I'll send you the PDF from I have a version that I can easily send to anyone. So if you did not order it, if you did order it and you don't have it by the time you want it, just shoot me a message on X, and I'll make sure I get you the PDF version, or you could just order the PDF and you'll have it instantly.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to link that. I'll link your Twitter page and Ourlads site so everyone can get everything in the show notes. So it's all in one place. And make sure to check out Dave, who has everything on the NFL draft, everything you need to know. Thank you so much for coming on. It was so great to chat again.
It was great to see you. I'm sure I'll see you again soon.
Yes.